Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today I'm going to share more of my first impressions about Shadows of the Galaxy spoilers part 9. Before I start, I would like to mention that there are spots open for my coaching program, so the schedule is on the comments below. Without further ado, let's go into our first spoilers. First, we got Karan Gore. So basically, yeah, something you always have to kind of look at whenever you're looking at the Star Wars Unlimited card is if a card costs more than 5 and has no immediate impact on the game, this is a massive red flag. And a card, in order to be playable while having no immediate impact on the game and costing that amount of resources, that it has to be very powerful to compensate that weakness. And unfortunately, Karan Gore does not really have this. So you're playing for 6, you get something that has a decent amount of stats, but nothing amazing. Even if you compare it to something like an ATST, which is a 6/7. There's a big difference in this game between being a 6/6 and a 6/7. And 6/6, you die to Palpatine, you're gonna die to Han Solo, you're gonna die to a bunch of stuff. At 6/7, you won't. And instead of Overwhelm, he gets an ability that whenever an enemy unit attacks your base, you can give a shield to a friendly unit. That's not very strong because whenever someone is attacking your base, you don't want to be giving shield to your unit. You want to be protecting yourself. You want to be stabilizing the board. So the ability is not amazing. It also only works on unit on the same arena of the unit that attacks. So let's say if you have a space unit, if the space unit attacks you, then you don't get anything. So the ability is not very strong and definitely does not justify having a 6 drop that has no immediate impact on the game. So I honestly don't see a reason to play this card. It's probably very good in draft, but outside of draft, it's pretty. I don't think it's playable in constructed. So I give it a 2 out of 10. Moving on, we got Outlaw Corona. So I have a very hard time rating those new bounty cards because obviously their stats are amazing, but here the bounty is a significant downside, having to put the top card of your deck as a resource, so basically your opponent gets to ramp for free. There are certain decks that really care about that ramp effect. There's some decks that really don't. My thought process about this card is that it's not very good against control, because the fact that it has 5 HP doesn't really make that big of a difference, and ramping the opponent whenever it dies is a huge downside, and doesn't really put that much pressure on the opponent to begin with. However, against aggro, the card becomes a lot more attractive, having such a big body that can kill enemy units and stay alive for such a long time, and the downside doesn't become as big of a deal. So overall, I give it a 5 out of 10. I think it's playable maybe against aggro, but other than this, I don't think it is going to be very good. So maybe a sideboard card, we'll see. Next, we got Kian Intimidator, not a card that looks doesn't look amazing on paper. 1/4 stat line, but 1/4 for 1 is not terrible. We see R2D2, which is a 1/4 for 1 and see a lot of play. So I think the playability of this card is going to depend on whether 1/4 for 1s are indeed good. The ability is fairly situational, but does give some utility to the card. But I think the main asset of the card is to be an Underworld card. So as we know, we have this in the Underworld archetype, so really kind of encourages you to play a lot of small Underworld units. We have the vehicle that allows you to bounce back your own Underworld card to exhaust the resource of the opponent. We have the bug that deals 1 damage every time you play an Underworld card. We have the leader that deals 1 damage to a unit every time you play an Underworld. So there's a lot of synergies around really spamming a lot of Underworlds. And as far as Underworld that costs 1, this one is, in my opinion, relatively playable. It's not amazing. I give it a 4 out of 10. Maybe it deserves a little bit more. It's really based on whether or not the Underworld archetype is going to need a card like this. It's not amazing, but it does fit a specific archetype. Then we got Tarfful, which is the confirmation that we're going to get a Wookiee tribal deck in the game. So tribal decks, for people who don't know, are basically decks oriented towards a specific unit trait. In this case, it's a Wookiee. And I have to say that this one does not look particularly appealing to me. 3/9 for 7 Restore 2 is not amazing. Once again, we're talking about a 7 cost card that doesn't have an immediate impact on the game. The ability is pretty powerful because it makes it so you are dealing. It does compensate for the lack of high attack value of the Wookiees in general. Wookiees in general is a very low attack value but very high health, and this does compensate the lack of attack strength from the Wookiee, so it allows them to take on bigger threats. But it does remain a pretty situational ability because it works. If you are going to try to deal against combat damage, you're going to try to attack. It remains a fairly situational ability. Compare this to something like Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knight. Like the card does not compare 6/7, so the Jedi Knight is going to have more stats. It's going to have Restore 3. It's going to have an immediate impact on the game. So I think the card is pretty weak, and overall the Wookiee archetype doesn't seem to be in a particularly good spot after this card is being revealed. Like if this is the kind of card that is supposed to be carrying the deck, I'm afraid that's not really going to be enough to make the deck playable. So hopefully we're hoping for stronger Wookiee synergies later on down the road. Next we got Fennec Shand, which follows the traditions of the leaders of Shadows of the Galaxy, which so far have had a very strong leader's ability but very weak stats. So they're a bit difficult to rate, right? Because they are really carried by their abilities, not by their stats, and this makes them very difficult to rate for me. And yeah, Fennec Shand is no exception. Our ability is incredibly powerful. Being able to give an ambush to a unit that costs 4 or less is very powerful. Even if you have to pay 1 for it, I think it's a very strong ability. And this is going to allow you to give, it does allow you to a great deal of flexibility. So I think the ability is really powerful. The leader himself, though, is not, as I said, 4/4. Saboteur is a very bad stat line for a leader that comes into play at 5. It basically dies to anything. But the ability becomes stronger because you no longer have to pay for it. And it's an action that doesn't even require you to attack with it. You can just use the ability, and you can use this ability multiple times per turn as well, which is pretty strong. Obviously, she's extremely fragile, but if you manage to keep the board clean and can protect her, then the ability really becomes a lot more powerful once she's deployed, because you can do it any numbers of time per turn, and you can do it for free, which I think is a big asset. So I feel like the card is pretty strong. So we'll see if it ends up being played. It's hard to rate because, once again, ability is very strong, but the stat line is pretty horrible. So I give it a 6 out of 10. Moving on, we got Rorwarr Tree Tender, another Wookiee. This one's very basic, 2/4 for 3. This is pretty terrible, to be honest. Grit is one of the weakest traits in the game, and it does not, and its stats are not particularly good. With all that being said, we have seen a lot of things that synergize with Grit. We've obviously seen the leader, the blue villainy leader that can give shield and damage the units. So it has some synergies with that. It also has some synergy with Chewbacca. You can play this card with Chewbacca giving Sentinel, and then with Sentinel, Grid becomes a lot more attractive. So there's a couple of interesting synergy, but overall I feel the card is pretty weak. I'll give it a 2 out of 10. I think it's very unlikely to see play in Constructed. Moving on, we got Smuggler, Starfighter. This card is pretty awful. The stats are absolutely terrible. The ability does not really do anything. The ability is very situational. Even requires you to have another underworld unit in play. The only saving grace for this card is the fact that the smuggle cost is reasonable, but overall the card is pretty terrible. I don't think it's going to see any play in Constructed, and even in draft I don't think you're going to be very happy to play that. So I'll give it a 1 out of 10. Moving on, we got the Darksaber, which is a very interesting card, which an incredible amount of it gives an incredible amount of stats. With all that being said, we already have an idea on how powerful big upgrades are in Star Wars Unlimited, and the answer is they're not really that powerful. We've seen both Fallen lightsabers and Jedi's lightsabers see very little play, and the reason why those upgrades don't see a lot of play because they are incredibly risky to play. When you play them and you get killed, or the unit that carries them gets killed, it's a huge tempo loss that you have, as well as a huge card disadvantage. And that's why people usually don't play them very often, because they're very situational. You want to play them usually when your opponent is kind of tap out. And the Darksaber is basically this, but amplifies because it costs 1 more. It has the same issue as those because it has no real immediate impact on the game, because you have to, even if you happen to have a bunch of Mandalorian in play, which is not guaranteed, you're going to have to play it and then you're going to have to attack, and only then can you actually give experience to other Mandalorian units, assuming you have some. So there's a lot of stuff that's synergized with upgrading this deck, and the fact that you can ignore the aspect penalty if you're playing on a Mandalorian definitely is going to help the card seize play. But even if decks that want to play that card, I think this card is only going to be like a one-of, just as an element of surprise or a card that you can possibly kind of take your opponent by surprise. So I think it's a decent card. I think as a one-of in an upgrade-based deck, like either in a Mandalorian or a Gar Saxon deck, I think this could be good. Playing upgrades on leaders is still a very powerful play because leaders are far less likely to just die in one shot. But I don't think this is going to be a staple. I don't think you're going to have to freak out to get this card. It's a legendary, so it can be quite difficult to get. But I think just as a one-of, I can see this card just being one of in those upgrade decks. But I don't think it's going to see a lot more play than that. So I give it a 5 out of 10. Moving on, we got Cloud Rider. And this card is pretty sweet. So first of all, 3-1 for 2 is not a terrible stat line. This allows you to trade with the Battlefield Marine, trade with basically all the 3-drops in the game. Basically, we already have Greedo, which basically is almost always, not always, but often it does get played just as a turn 1 play, like almost as a 2-drop. I think that, for example, if Greedo was a 2-drop, the card would be a lot worse, but I feel the card would still see a little bit of play. But obviously, this one has a huge advantage over a 2-cost Greedo, whatever that means. It does have Ambush, and obviously Ambush is a very, very powerful keyword. It's the first card that costs 2 that has Ambush, so that's going to be very powerful. The ability to come out and kill something with the new Boba Fett, this card end up having 4-1 Ambush. So that is obviously very attractive to be able to kill units as 4 health for only 2 resources is also very attractive. And obviously, worst case scenario, you can just play it, and it's a 3-1 for 2, which is not terrible. So I think this card is extremely solid and it's going to see a lot of play. I give it an 8 out of 10. It also is Underworld, by the way. Moving on, we got the Fugitive Wookiee, which is a card that is once again a little bit difficult to rate. I think this card is pretty strong. It's a 3-3 for 2 is obviously an amazing stat line. We see Battlefield Marine, which is one of the best cards, Spark of Rebellion, the best 2-drop in the game. And here, obviously, it does have a downside with the bounty of exhausting a unit, but this downside is actually rarely super relevant. So I think in most decks, you're going to be very happy to play Fugitive Wookiee. In one example where I can see this card being a little bit worse, is like if you're playing a deck that has a lot of unit that comes into play ready, like you're playing like fire sprays and stuff like this. So for example, in Boba Yellow, I don't know if Boba Yellow is going to be wanting to play that card, because here's the risk of Fugitive Wookiee getting killed and then tap down your fire spray. It can be kind of a blowout. There's some, but I think this card looks pretty strong in paper. I would be surprised if it doesn't see any play. I think just the 3-3 for 2 stat line is just too good to pass, and it's not like Yellow had many good 2-drops before this thing came out. So I think it's very likely to see a lot of play. This is a very good card. Moving on, we got Enfys Nest, which is basically Syndicate Lackeys, but it takes 3 less damage whenever it ambushes a unit, and this ability carries on to the next card you're playing after. So I feel like this is a pretty powerful ability and well worth of the extra cost that you're paying for the card. I think there's 2 decks in which I can see this card seeing play. I can see this in forgot the name of that girl there, Fennec Shand, or I can see this card in the new Boba Daimyo deck. Both of those decks are going to have a heavy amount of ambush units, or they're going to give ambush thanks to the Fennec ability, and therefore I think the ability can be quite strong, and I think the card is not bad just by itself. It's kind of like, see it as a mini Han, as a sort of a Han reluctant hero. So I think this card is pretty good. I give it a 6 out of 10. Moving on, we got Black Sun Starfighter. This card is not very flashy, right? Just a 3-2 for 3 Sentinels, but it feels a very specific needs for villainy deck. Like villainy in space is very vulnerable in the early stages of the game. depending on what color you're playing. And this is why we've seen so many Starviper, right? Because the villainy decks really needed to have some sort of defense in space early on in the game, and this fulfilled that role pretty well. 3/2 Sentinels will trade against most of the stuff that you're annoyed against whenever you're playing against Sabine, for example, the A-Wings, and especially the Red 3 and all that. So it's not super flashy, right? It's not, the stats for cost is not amazing, but I feel like the card is good enough that it's going to see that it could see play depending on the meta. If we're a meta that has a lot of space aggression and can we put the pressure on you in space, I can definitely see that card seeing some play. So I give it a 5 out of 10. Next we got the Wookiee Warrior, another card that kind of is a payoff for playing Wookiee. The problem is, once again, the card is not so amazing, and the payoff for playing a Wookiee deck is not really that big. It's a 2/5 for 4 great, which is not super attractive, and if you control another Wookiee, you get to draw a card. It's not exactly amazing. If there's a strong Wookiee deck and also some real payoff for having grit in a context of a Wookiee deck, I can see this card being quite good. But so far that's not really what we have. So far I'm giving it 4 out of 10. We'll see how it goes for the future. Then we got Gar Saxon. So Gar Saxon is very interesting. It basically gives a passive bonus of +1 attack to all upgraded units. And so it's kind of following the same tradition as other Shadow of the Galaxy leaders, where the ability is very, very strong, but the leader stats are not amazing. A 4/7, 4/6, it's okay, but it's not amazing, especially when you compare this to Boba Fett, collecting bounty, 4/7, 4/5, obviously. With all that being said, this card has a lot of things going on. First of all, it has 3 great traits: Imperial, Mandalorian, and Official. So that's 3 great traits in which you can build a lot of things around it. The ability is very strong, and there's so many. The thing is, like, you don't really need to pull an upgrade on unit to actually give the bonus. All you have to do is play a unit that has the shielded keyword, and it turns out there's quite a few cards that are shielded. So we're all talking about, for example, Crafty Smuggler. We're talking about Bib Fortuna. We're talking about 7th Feet Defender. Even a Wilderness Fighter. Everything that has the keyword shielded basically gets a +1 attack bonus. And honestly, you can fill your deck almost entirely with cards that are shielded, and those cards are actually pretty decent. And getting an extra +1 attack bonus as long as they have their shield is honestly very, very strong. So this kind of like almost a global +1 attack bonus to all of your units. That is really, really strong. And you don't even need to be playing an upgrade deck to do that. All you get to do is play a bunch of shielded units, which makes the card very, very powerful. Yeah, anything that can like give shields, like we're talking about Moment of Peace. We're talking about there's just a bunch of ways that can very easily give the +1 attack bonus to your units. And then we got, of course, the Mandalorian keyword and all so we got the 4/7, and then you can play the +1/+3 Mandalorian armor to make him to give him a shield and makes him even tougher to kill, I think. And then the other passive ability that once it's deployed is also very powerful. So whenever you get to return a card, return an upgrade back into your hand, whenever your unit gets killed, that is also quite good. So in my opinion, Gar Saxon is the best leader that we've seen so far from Shadows of the Galaxy. He seems to have the leader that has the most impactful ability that we've seen, that I think is going to be quite good against most decks. So I give it a 7 out of 10. Obviously, the only thing that is holding him back is the fact that the stats for price is not amazing. But other than this, very, very good leader. Then we got Saxon Gauntlet. This card is honestly pretty attractive, especially when you compare it to the Gladiator Star Destroyer. So Gladiator Star Destroyer is basically a 5/6 Sentinel, but it's only Sentinel for 1 turn, where this is Sentinel permanently, and whenever he gets attacked, he gets an experience token, and this experience token intervene before the damage are dealt, which is a pretty big deal. That means that Clan Saxon is always going to be, at the very minimum, it's going to be a 5/6 with the experience token, and it's going to grow bigger and bigger as he gets more attacks. So it's not really easy to deal with at all. It's not easy to deal with. So it becomes a 5/6. And if you're playing Gar Saxon, you also it basically turns into a 6/6 as it comes into play. You also have the flexibility to give you that experience token to another unit. And once again, the Sentinel is permanent. So this card is really significantly better than Gladiator Star Destroyers, which has never seen a lot of play in constructed, but a little bit sometimes. It was really on the verge of seeing some constructed play, but this card is significantly better than that. And so I think it's a decent card in Gar Saxon. So I'm gonna give 6 out of 10. It's a good way to block the Space Arena, in my opinion, if you are in specific need of a card like this. Then we got Brutal Tradition. +1/+2 for 2 is not exactly amazing, but the ability to get back the upgrades whenever an enemy unit is defeated is honestly quite good, even if you have to pay for it. So I think it's going to be a card that is going to be an attractive way to boost your unit and to get always like an upgrade somewhere in the game. So I think it fits a specific need for the upgrade deck. So I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's not spectacular, but I think it's going to fill a specific need that might see a little bit of play. Then we got Fenrir. So Fenrir, it does have an immediate impact on the game. You can play an upgrade with a discount and give a -2/-2 to a unit. But overall, this effect is fairly weak because first of all, you need to have an upgrade in hand. This upgrade kind of need to cost 2 or less otherwise. Then the 5/6 sideline for 6 is okay, and the -2/-2 is not great. I am not super thrilled by this card. It's not like there are going to be situations where obviously there's going to be situation where it's going to be pretty good, but I think most of the time it's just going to be a little bit underwhelming. So I'm not super thrilled by it, but I think it is playable. It is playable, I think, is what I would say. So I give it a 4 out of 10. Next we got Viszla. I have no idea how to pronounce that. Anyway, it's an 8/7 for 7. And it has this ability that allows you to basically unequip something and equip it to something else. It has to be another non-vehicle upgrade, and if you cannot upgrade it to your dude, then it gets defeated. Very situational ability, I have to say. Once again, your opponent needs to have an upgrade. Obviously, shields and experience give an upgrade, but then this is very low value if you're doing this on a shield or an upgrade. So yeah, very situational ability. So we're talking about a 7-drop that barely has any sort of immediate impact on the game. So that's, in my opinion, a massive red flag. And I think being an 8/7 with a very situational and on-attack ability does not make up for that. So obviously there's going to be a situation where the card is going to be very strong. But overall, I'm not thrilled by this card. My first impression is that I don't think this card is going to see constructed play. So I give it a 3 out of 10. Last but not least, we got Hellcat Soldier. It is a 2/3 for 2 Saboteur, so it's pretty much the same as the Rebel Pathfinder. So Rebel Pathfinder has the advantage of being heroism, so I think it can see play in a little bit more decks than just being red. I think overall villainy and heroism aspects are less restrictive than the other aspects. But I think the big deal about this card is like it is a trooper and a Mandalorian, so it has 2 very useful keywords. So it is very similar than the Pathfinder. Pathfinder has seen some competitive play in Spark of Rebellion. It's a very niche card, but it has seen some play. So there's good reason to believe that Hellcat Soldier is going to see play as well. With all that being said, you got to understand that as we're getting more sets, there's going to be, of course, a power creep that's going to come out, and some cards that maybe would have made the cut if they were printed in Spark of Rebellion might not make the cut anymore. So I think this is going to be a big limitation for this card. It's like, yes, theoretically it is as good as a Pathfinder, so can see some play, just like a Pathfinder can see play. But you gotta understand that with the power creep coming out, this could be an issue for the card. So I think it is playable. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Maybe it's a little bit generous. Maybe it should be a 4 out of 10. But that's kind of my first impression. So overall today was a pretty weak reveal. Even the big legendary cards were not exactly super big bangers. But we got ourselves a pretty strong leader, in my opinion. Gar Saxon is in my opinion, the strongest leaders we've seen so far. and a leader that I think a lot of people are going to be playing around and building around for sure. So with all that being said, thank you so much for watching this video until the end, and I'll see you next time.